How you doing, Chandler?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, Joe? Can you hear me good?
I can hear you perfectly.
Excellent. Guess we're just waiting for our Australian friends, man.
Our Australian overlords.
The Australian overlords.
I'm trying to find just what I said earlier because I fucking forgot all of it. Oh, that's it.
Yeah, man, you're Australian overlords, except for Liam, who's more like a court jester. Apparently, according to some people in QallOut.
Insert salty Terrence comment here.
Oh, that happened.
Oh man, come on, Hewitt.
How goat it, lads? I don't know. Learn to spell, bid. God.
Don't you dare insult our Australian slang, mate.
Yeah, dude, he doesn't speak American, okay?
Yeah, first contention why y'all art is good. You don't speak American.
Don't y'all know how to speak?
That. You all regret that.
Oh man, Ort, you've picked it up, man. It's bad. It's bad. Don't do it.
How I joined.
Ben, you jump on it. You throw your computer on the ground and you jump on it. We will all magically come together in a cube and battle.
Make sure you get your pet kangaroo to give it a good whack too, just for good measure.
And the 750,000 other animals in Australia that's trying to kill you.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, we can see you, yeah.
Can you hear me, though?
Yeah,
Speaking of animals, a rooster just entered.
I mean, it's mostly your nose, to be fair.
Yeah, sorry. It's because I'm trying to go off my phone. I'm on holiday.
Nice.
He's at a hotel.
No, I'm not a hotel. I'm at a holiday house.
I don't know
I don't
what
even know
the
what
difference
it
between
is.
that is.
Don't you guys have holiday houses in America? Well, I guess that's point one for the Australians.
Hey.
Okay, that happened.
All right. How are we going to do this?
I'm wearing a tweed jacket, so I make the rules. I'm just throwing that out there.
Go for it.
All right. Well, rule maker. The motion is such that the positive burden is on you guys as the pro. So why don't you start us off?
All right. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go first affirmative, first negative, second affirmative, rebuttal, and build case. Second negative, rebut, build case, blah, 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 cross-examination, discussion. Because I think we've got a good amount of time that we can open up to this. So however long y'all want this to be, we can make it. Or we can just, hammer out the debate real fast and then whatever. Because so far I don't see any voting bar. So you can't win this one.
No.
We've already won.
Just wait.
Thumbs up if we win, thumbs down if we lose. That being said, we're going to kick it off. I'm going to keep my opening statement pretty short, pretty sweet, and something that we can all build off of.
Well, actually, before you start, Joe, if you wanted to go first half, first neg, second half, second neg, how long do you want those speeches to be?
Honestly, I don't want to put a time frame on it. I mean, if you have a lot to talk about, then go ahead and talk about it.
Let me count the ways. Let me count the ways.
Right.
Let's just keep it reasonable. Go for it, Joe.
Right. I mean, I haven't done any studying for this or anything like that, so I haven't built a case at all. Chandler is actually going to be the powerhouse of this, but I'm going to be framing the debate. So We're going to go with that one, tweed ass jacket.
Let's go.
All right, so the first thing to say is frame. Why does this argument matter? Our Aussie overlords have used Australia time and time again in debates as to show why they are right. We here on the affirmative disagree with this proposition because we are Americans. And as Americans, we must let the world know that we're better than you. That way that you stay in your place in your sad little dry area. So the first thing that we're going to think about in this debate as we talk is that we have to have some level of comparison in a world. This is a world without the United States or a world without Australia. How would the world be? Our contention is that the global impact and the domestic impact of the United States is greater than that of Australia. I will give three contentions as to why this is true. Pre-state them: economic, global standard, and technological. I'm going to start off with the economics. The economy of the United States is far beyond Australia, not just in GDP as a measurable statistic, but also as an idea. We were the originators and the main pushers of Adam Smith's beautiful idea of free market economics and international free trade. We have been a part of the World Trade Organization and were some of the original purveyors of the World Trade Organization after World War II. We are the standard that other countries live up to figure out how they should use a market economy. That alone impacted the world in a net positive manner. The second one I want to talk about is a global standard. We are the global standard, like I just said and signposted in my previous contention. We're the global standard when it comes to world trade agreements. We're the global standard when it comes to manufacturing. We're the world standard when it comes to professorship. We're the world standard when it comes to education, especially at the tertiary level. The third thing I want to talk about is technological. We are the technology powerhouse of the world, hands down, whether it be healthcare, whether it be quantum computing, whether it be other advances in physics, medicine, economics. I mean, when we talk about economics, the University of Chicago has literally half of the Nobel Prizes that have been given out. And of the rest of them, I think 90% have gone to American economists. Economics, as we know it, was written by an American, Alfred Marshall, who laid out the foundation for what we call non-Walrasian economics, which proves that, or which goes to show that in America, everything that we do better. Ford, come on, his technology changed the world. And with that, I will go to y'all.
All right, Sick. I'll do the first and Hewitt can do the second. So I'll briefly respond to some of the things you said, and then I'll make some positive arguments. The first thing you say is that this is a world comparison debate in whether or not the world will be better with or without America. That's not true. The debate is Australia or America in its current day. So those historisms aren't as persuasive. Secondly, you tell me that you guys were the first ones to put forth Adam Smith's beautiful idea. Excellent. Adam Smith was arbitrarily born into America. That doesn't mean the American culture is strictly better as it is right now as it was back then. Secondly, you tell me you're better in education. Strictly not true. Even though there are top-tier universities in America, there are also top-tier universities in Australia. For example, the Australian National University, which is like 6th in the world right now, is outranking most American universities. And secondly, you say that secondly, the thing on education is that Australia has the HEC system, which means that not only are there top-tier universities in Australia, but anyone can access university education in Australia for free at an above standard level and pursue their lives in any way that they see fit. One of the core values of what it is to be American is to access freedom. It is the contention here that being able to access education at a higher level, based on any level that you wish, is the one that enacts the most freedom for those individuals because of this HEC system. The next thing you tell me is that the US economy is the best in manufacturing. I mean, they're about tying with China, so it seems like a really strange argument, but that's not really in comparison to Australia. If you are comparing those countries, you need to say whether or not that manufacturing is important, regardless of the fact it exists. In positive arguments, I'm going to say a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to say is even though that the Australian economy is significantly smaller, that makes it all the more impressive, all the things I'm about to say. The first thing I'm going to talk about is healthcare. The average life expectancy for an Australian is 82.45 years compared to an American, 78.70 years. I think that hands down just demonstrates why Australia is a better place to live, because you get to live for about 4 to 5 years longer, and that gap is only widening. Why is it the case that people are living longer in Australia? It's because of our nationalised healthcare system, which means that anyone can access that healthcare. The claim from Joe is to say, well, America is the best at healthcare. For the people who can afford it, not everyone can afford it. The Australian healthcare system allows people to access it, allows them to live longer lives, and importantly, allows them to live better lives. On crime, in Australia, there are 10.38 murders per million people. In America, there are 42.01 murders per million people. Not only in Australia do you live longer, but you have a less of a chance of dying horribly for absolutely nothing that you have done wrong. Joe tells us that, well, under their side of the house, they've got advances in quantum computing. Australia has funnily enough, the leading university in quantum computing, which is the University of New South Wales. So that's a bit embarrassing. Look, all of the reasons to believe, and the final argument I'm going to make here is that Australians are strictly better at debating than Americans. And given that this is a debate, and Ben and I are both Australians, we're already beating you in the debate, which means it's strictly untrue that you are capable of winning this. And I'll pass over to Chandler.
Okay, so I'm going to go into your points in the reversed order. So onto that point of how Australians are better at debating. If my math is correct, there are more Americans that have won QallOut tournament so far than Australians, and it's also an American that's tied with Ben down there for the most wins in a QallOut tournament as a small marginalized example. So I think that speaks volumes on the debating statute as a whole. To start with your point about you talk about Australian education. Well, to go through Australian education versus American education, American adults spend more years in school. Americans have more children that leave primary schools per 100,000. Americans have a higher literacy rate than that in Australia. So just because you have some small specific schools that happen to be better in a certain department does not necessarily relate to the overall improvement of your education system compared to America. Now, to talk about the economy and manufacturing jobs, you talk about how that has to relate directly to Australia. Well, America has 6 times the amount of exports in Australia, and when you actually look at the parts that make up Australia's economy, the majority of the factors in Australia's economy come down to a few industries, being agriculture, mining, and tourism, compared to America, which is the most diverse economy in the world. And we have agricultural jobs compared to technology jobs, which we lead the field in technological advancements in the world. And so it ultimately comes down to how you equate the global impact of these countries, right? Similar to what Joe said. So when you look at how many embassies are in the world for each country, Australia has 52 embassies worldwide compared to America's 294 embassies. America has stronger trade ties with every single country, being one of the founding members of the World Bank and the WTO, and even just having a powerful seat in the UN, being on the Permanent Security Council. So when you look at the global impact of these countries, there should be no example to show that Australia is even close to the United States in power abroad. And you talk about the life expectancy of Australians versus the United States. So first of all, 4 years is actually not that big of a margin comparatively to some other countries like Africa, where you can see up to 10 years margins. Secondly, a big part of our life expectancy being so low is, one, because we actually are more involved in conflict abroad and wars, right? So just because Australia practices a much more isolationist, pacifist policy does not directly relate to them being a better country here, say, just because their life expectancy is slightly higher than that of the Americans. And I'll pass it to Ben on that.
Okay, I'm going to pen and paper. I was trying to remember. Stuff about Australian pacifists seems to be quite wrong. We follow you into nearly every war you've ever been in. So, Australia is one of the only countries who was part of the Coalition of the Willing, for example. The reason the life expectancy gap exists is because of healthcare. But also, the point doesn't even, then your comparison to Africa doesn't make any sense, because just because the margin is smaller, like 4 to 10, by the way, that's still both meaningful amounts, doesn't mean that we're not better. We're just better by a smaller margin than America is better than Africa. I mean, like, whoop-de-doo, if you want to celebrate the fact that your life expectancy is greater than sub-Saharan Africa, and it's, like, oh, it's just a little bit better than Australia, then feel free to claim that, but that still means we're winning. On the debating thing, I think one of the things, QallOut is an interesting sample, because the vast majority of debaters on QallOut are Americans, but Australians occupy a disproportionate amount of success stories, and that's the same as, for example, in the World University Debating Championships, where despite the fact that like 50% of the tournament is America, Australia has won it like 6 out of the last 10 years or something like that. And one of the two teams, which was one of the only times America won it recently, was when one of their speakers was from Australia and just was studying in America at the time. I think just the broad theme of a lot of your guys' arguments is just how America is bigger, and I think that's an error in the way to frame the debate. Because if you want to point to things like GDP and you want to point to things, like, oh, what's the impact if America was to leave? Like, that to me says that, for example, if say China left, right, then China would probably also, like, by in some respects qualify as, better than America, because the population's bigger, or they're starting to do more of a particular type of manufacturing or a particular type of farming. That doesn't mean that they're better. I think you need to because if you would imagine the world without America, others would just take its place. I think we need to look at, for example, like per population, how we're doing. And I think it's the better way to think about it. It's just, where would you rather live, right? Would you rather live in a place where to go to university means that you need to get slugged with a student loan, where you're 4 times more likely to be murdered, where if you get sick, you're likely to die unless you have healthcare, unless you have a ton of money? Or would you rather live in a place where, regardless of where you end up in the lottery of birth, you'll be provided for healthcare, you'll be able to afford to go to college, and you won't be paying that debt for the rest of your life, and you're going to live longer, and you're going to be able to see your grandkids get born and see them get married and stuff like that. So that, I think, is the way to think of the debate. Just think about it as to, where would you rather live? I think it's pretty clear that from what we've seen so far, that Australia is definitely winning on that front. And with that, we'll go over to whatever the next section is.
Oh, so this would be my last speech before we move into the cross-examination. So I want to start off with saying that Liam made a few blunders. There is no top 10 university in Australia. I don't agree with that. I think London has 3 top schools, and I think Ivy League schools of the United States: Stanford, Columbia, Harvard, MIT, University of Pennsylvania, UC Berkeley, Duke. I think those kind of crowd out the entire top 10. And I don't see any other reason to believe otherwise. Also, last breakthrough I seen that happened in any major quantum computing was the United States at UC Berkeley right before the major riots. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they are the top university in the world for quantum computing. So, lastly, to point out about what Ben said, he's talking about it's bigger, not better. I understand that we're not talking about just bigger. What I'm saying is that even if you don't buy the argument about what was before, okay, fine, we'll talk about just right now. What led us to where we are now does matter, which is why I brought it up. Because we still have the Bill of Rights, we still have the Constitution, we still have things in our nation that we are founded upon, that are still active, that shape the world, and we still are the world shaper. You want to know what the #1 export for the United States is? Culture. Culture to Australia. We give culture to Japan. We give culture to China. We give culture to Europe. We don't import much culture, but we definitely export a lot of it. Secondly, if we want to talk about where you're more likely to live, let's see where people are voting with their feet. Who has more people coming and beating down the doors of their country? Is it Australia, where there's thousands of creatures trying to murder you at every step? Or is it the United States, where you are more likely to be murdered by a human? Sure. And you're more likely to die early because you're fat, because we have so much food. Because we have an abundance of food that people eat too much and then they die. The #1 killer in the United States is being fat. Next, then we can look at like crises going on right now. There's a huge crisis. There's a banking crisis in Australia. I don't see a banking crisis in the United States.
What? What?
What's a banking crisis in the United States? Explain to me what the banking crisis in the United States is.
Or the global financial crisis.
Yeah, like very recently, less than a decade ago.
Are you talking about 2008?
Which Australia was one of the only countries to recover from, by the way.
Yeah,
Y'all didn't even recover. Y'all didn't even get hit by it because y'all are so minuscule that nobody even sold y'all any bad.
No. It's because we took preemptive measures when you guys were fucking up. There was large stimulus packages into the consumer base, which meant that stimulated spending, which means small businesses didn't go down, which means they didn't recant on their loans either. That's why Australia escaped, because we had superior economic management.
And yet, if you look at your debt to GDP ratio in current years, Australia's debt to GDP ratio is the worst it's ever been in history, has yet to go down, and is increasing exponentially compared to the United States that's actually beginning to improve from the economic recession in the past decade.
Right. And then again, we go back to the housing crisis and the banking crisis that y'all are getting ready to deal with. Y'all are going to hit another recession. You're going to sit here and tell me that your housing prices are not astronomically high compared to what the market wants them to be.
Well, they are what the market wants them to be. That's why they're high.
So you don't agree with bubbles?
No. I think about the logic, Joe. Anyone who wants to buy a house in Australia can, if they've got enough money to do so. Our housing prices are higher than yours because there's a higher demand for them than there are in America, per se. What does that say about people wanting to live and move to Australia?
I would disagree with that point about it being a demand and that there's just been less supply. The majority of Australia is uninhabitable desert land. We're going to get killed by emus that you guys lost the war to in 1932.
That's also true of America. Like, the vast majority of America is also uninhabitable desert.
No, it's
no, it's not. I don't think that's remotely true. The majority of our population, is very well spread across the United States. We have plenty of room. We're a much bigger country. Obviously, we have 350.
Think about the ratio. Where is the vast majority of your population living in America? It's on the coasts, right? Exactly the same as Australia.
That's everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
No. As an argument against this.
We're talking about uninhabitable land. We're talking about uninhabitable land. The only uninhabitable land in the United States is because there's farming, because the United States produces 60% of the world's food.
Yeah, that just, if you're saying the only reason the land is uninhabitable is because it's been used for agriculture, that's the same as Australia. There's nowhere in Australia you can't live if you don't actually want to. It's just that people obviously prefer to live on the coast because it's, cooler and there's more population and stuff like that.
Except for Western Australia, right, where they had to call in the Royal Australian Army to try and kill some emus.
Jesus Christ.
Actually, no, I do want to talk about that. Joe says that the biggest killer in the United States is obesity and heart disease. That's exactly the same in Australia as well. The number of deaths from all of our crazy poisonous animals is exceptionally low. And you want to know why? Because we have a much better medical system which takes care of people who get bit by funnel web spiders, for example. I've got a cross-ex question though, and this is to Chandler. Chandler claims that America is better because you guys spend more time in schools. The reason US does, Australia doesn't. The reason why Australia doesn't is because we have a streamlined education system, which is if you look it up, all of the major Australian universities are cutting down lots of courses so you can do streamlined core courses and then branch out rather than doing shitloads of subjects in your first year, getting overwhelmed and dropping out. Why is it you think spending a larger proportion of your life not being productive to society is a valuable thing that America has over Australia?
So clearly those miscellaneous courses have some sort of purpose and some sort of value, right? Because we are leading the world in technological advancements, right? We are the world's biggest economy. We have a larger diversity of industry. So clearly they have some inherent value because also our literacy rate is higher than that of Australia. So you can't just discount them, especially when they have some proven results.
That's not true. You don't have a higher literacy rate than Australia. We both have 99. I know the site that you're looking up, and if you read under it, it says equal with Australia. The reason why America is ranked higher is because they have a high population. But that's not anything to do with the ratios. The thing I think all of you guys are missing, except for Hewitt, because he said this as well, is that you guys are big and thus you can do lots of things, but compare that to the ratio of the things that you can do. For example, Australia has about 15 universities, thereabouts, right? 6 of them are in the top 20 universities in the world. Top 100 universities in the world. That is a ratio of 33% of our universities. Look at all the advances that Australia has, that we do that with a much smaller population and a much lesser amount of money than you guys do. That is an argument to believe that Australia is better. Yeah.
We also invented
Okay.
which I'm using to do this debate.
I didn't hear that. Say it again.
We also invented Wi-Fi.
Okay, well, we invented cars,
Which,
so
using
you know
to do
we
this
can go
debate.
back and forth
It's
on
true.
technological advancements all day, and I guarantee that the U.S. will win in that aspect.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I've got a good question then. So when you're saying we can go back and forth, I agree. And likewise, a lot of the figures you brought are like debt to GDP ratio and stuff. I think a lot of this is becoming trapped in being quite arcane because, for example, just for the everyday person, you know, trying to live their life, which I think is probably a better way to think about this. You've got a good university you can go to in Australia. You've got a good university you can go to in America. But where can you afford to go? That's the question. Because people don't live in terms of averages. People don't live in terms of their country's ranking. They live in what they are free to do and what they can afford to do. So say, for example, you're a person like myself, right? And you've got the marks to get into a place. You know, maybe you're not the top student, so you're not getting scholarships literally shelled out to you, but you've minimum standard. Can you actually go to the universities which you're saying are so great? Can you participate in the research which
in most states, yes. Like,
why are you going to be?
I just want to add
locked
this in like Georgia, for example, the state that I live in. There's something called the Hope Scholarship funded by the government, where if you make grades just above a 3.0, which is a B average, you get to go to college for free. It covers your tuition and all your costs going to school in most populated states.
What's the population of Georgia?
13 million people.
Okay.
Can I ask you that? How do you get the?
They look at your high school GPA.
How do you get the average? How do you have an average before your university?
You qualify for that scholarship.
So
yes, and then if you get it
only
after your
people
first
who have
semester
got a
of college,
GPA
or
of
if you ever
3.0
like
qualify
maintain
for
and
the
get back up
scholarship.
to that GPA, they start issuing you the scholarship again at the start of your next semester.
So only people who do quite well, because the B average is still pretty good. So only people who perform can go.
Overall,
basically, everyone else
for
can't.
most people, the majority of people in Georgia, for example, that have the Hope Scholarship are like the majority of college students are on the Hope Scholarship. So clearly, it's quite obtainable and not that difficult.
Yes, of course. The majority of people in university are on that Hope Scholarship because they can't afford to otherwise. Precisely.
Yeah, that's the point, right? Like the reason the majority of people are on it is because the system you're in locks out people who can't get it because it's simply unaffordable. I guess the question to you is, do you think that people who pass their courses but don't maintain that B average deserve a place at university, or do you think they deserve a place somewhere else?
Anywhere. I think that's a flaw in logic. You don't deserve anything, right? So let's say that you're a C average student. There's no reason why you should not go to a trade school. Trade schools are just as good as a college. Obviously, college needs to be meritocratic, and it also needs to be significantly hard to get in because you only want the best there. If we let everybody in college, one, you'll ruin what good a college is. Two, you'll have to force some level of grade inflation. And three, we're not going to have as many people to do trades. And I think that
well, hang on, that's not so. For example, right? Say you let lots of people into college, but the workforce only picks up, like the top 50% or whatever. Would you rather have all of the people who who went with, like, for everyone else who didn't get a job in the college level thing? Would you rather your, for example, daycare provider or your like service cashier actually had a college education so that that they're competent at something? That they know a bit about the world? Would you rather your average citizen be kind of educated about history and politics, or would you rather your average citizen only have the education that a trade school can offer?
I think it's pretty solid. I definitely think it's solid enough for a cashier. As for daycare in the United States, to be a daycare provider, you have to have at least a 2-year degree.
Right. So So just to be clear, you think you want your average voter to have basically a high school education and not much more than that.
And I don't think that trade schools do not have to teach other subjects out of trade. I just think that they need to be directed towards a trade, right? So a trade school can be 2 years, right? Trade schools in my state, so I live in North Carolina, we have community colleges. These community colleges teach trades. Now, to do a trade, you have to get a 2-year degree, but it's free to do this. It is completely free to get a 2-year trade degree. Now, you will take other courses. You have to take a minimum level of college algebra, and you have to take a minimum level of English, and you have to take a minimum level of humanities and sciences. And then you finish your concentration in your trade for a year. And I think that is a solid, I think it's a solid way to go. Like I said, it's free. So you're not losing anything, and they're still educated above just average. And I do want to point one thing out. Like, so your top universities, right? So Harvard and all these top universities that you pointed to, if you are underprivileged in the United States, an Ivy League school is free. It is free to underprivileged individuals in the United States. If you make the marks to get into Harvard, it's free.
Well, it just depends what you qualify as underprivileged. Like, there's a huge problem with people who really can't afford to, who need the grant. Like, the system's flawed because there's a group, because not everyone who for which price is a barrier, it qualifies for the grant. So when you say underprivileged, it's really, you got to be really, really underprivileged. But there are still lots of people who are priced out of the system. And that's why the philosophy around university in Australia is a bit better, because the average amount of more people have been to university in Australia as a proportion than in the US, because there isn't such a price barrier, because like HECS, you never have to pay back unless you meet a certain income threshold. And that means that when people vote, for example, they vote more intelligently and they're a bit more engaged with what's going on.
I think I've got a better way of explaining the way people are priced out. So the first thing I want to say is that if it is true that you think it's good to have a free system for trade degrees, then you should also think it's a net good to have a free system for university degrees, as that would be a benefit that Australia has and America doesn't. Secondly, you say that individuals who are poor have an opportunity to go to an Ivy League school for free. There are people in the middle and lower classes who would get solid grades, but are not disprivileged enough to attend a university in America, which means that for all of the people who aren't lucky enough to be living in Georgia, the other, 330 million minus 15 million, 315 million people, if they're not born in Georgia, they get a B grade, but they can't afford to go to university. They're fucked for the rest of their life, which means that if you want people who are competent in university educated jobs and white collar jobs, you're pricing people out who would regularly get a B or above average because they're unable to afford it. In Australia, we do not have that problem.
So I want to make another statement. I'm sorry, Chandler. Let me jump in real quick.
Go ahead.
North Carolina also, it has the research triangle, which is Duke, NC State, UNC Chapel Hill.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Is that true for every state in America?
Okay, so I'll answer this. So most states actually have this. The only states that don't have this are like the ones with significantly low populations, are mainly agricultural states. There's a very minute proportion of the population. But even without something like the Hope Scholarship, it's a national mandate. It's something called the FAFSA, where they take and they look at your tax returns and they compare that to your expected contribution towards college. So, for example, since I came from a rather poor family and they look at your tax returns, that you only have to give so much of an expected contribution based to how much you have an income for your family.
Right. Okay. But
this sounds so bureaucratic, right? Like, the question is, are there people who get priced out? The answer in America is yes. The answer in Australia is no. It's as simple as that. Like, you can run loops around, in this thing, there's this scholarship for this income level, which is basically funding a whole lot of accountants, to do, functionally useless manipulation of people's accounts to make it look like they qualify for a scholarship. In Australia, it's just Hex is Hex.
Also-
Everyone can get it, and you
Also,
don't have to pay it back unless you
make it
actually
into
end up earning
university as
enough
well.
that,
It's
that
not
would
like
justify
when
you
Joe
paying it
says
back.
before you
And so
don't
everyone
deserve
gets
anything. Like, it's
Yeah,
not
you
like
go
in
in.
Australia, anyone who wants to go to university does. Like, there are systems to get in, but you do have to make the marks to qualify for your course. It just means that price is never a factor, ever. If you, yeah. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's the question is for you guys: do you think that provided academic achievement is checked for, because it's checked for under both
especially
sides?
since I don't
Do you
normally-
think that price should be something which
And
prevents
normally
somebody from
is
getting a
in
higher
America,
education?
like a large majority of the time, if you want to go to college and you are a good enough student to get accepted to a college, you normally will get to attend that college. It is very rare that you are going to get accepted to a top level school in America and you are not going to be allowed to go to it because of your income. Okay. Even with that, like if you look at Australia, the skilled labor force is actually getting paid significantly less than the skilled labor force in America comparatively, because your degrees are inherently worth less because it has taken the competition out of the market of colleges. Colleges are a business in America, at least. I'm not an expert on the Australian college system, but in America, colleges are inherently a business. There are several for-profit colleges out there, and so to government mandate them by making them free is going to significantly take away the competition and the value of all those degrees, as we can see reflected in the skilled labor force in Australia.
No. There's still competition. The way Hex works is that if I apply to the University of Wollongong and I apply through Hex, then the government pays the university straight away. The university doesn't lose any money. They still get what they would charge for that course, which means competition exists. It just means I only pay back the government when I start earning money, right? Which gives them, the universities and the government, to have an incentive to make my degree able to earn me money over the threshold, such they can garnish my wages and I can pay back my debt, right? So there is still competition.
The other thing as well, I think what they're getting at is saying that packing tons of people into university inherently makes the degrees worth less. I don't think that's the case. What that just means is that employers only ever select, like employers will always select off the top, right? So regardless of how deep the pool is, the top is still the top. The question is, for everyone else, right, under your system, everyone else is not educated, right? So the people who, for example, handle your money, as cashiers or do secretarial work or do any menial task, right, which often does require some amount of intelligence. People who vote, people who need to deal with their taxes, people who need to make financial decisions about their children. Do you want those people to be idiots who have only been educated up to a high school level, or do you want those people to have a university education? I think the answer is pretty clear. Like, we'd rather them have an education, which is why, in principle, like you just have to answer the question: do you think price, like cash, should be a thing which prevents people from going to university? You can say it's rare that it happens in America, but I don't believe you. Like, you've got the student loan crisis thing, right? Like, this has been a hot political issue for ages. There are stories in the news of people having to live in their cars so they can afford to go to school, and people and also people who take up all sorts of wacky jobs. Like, that's not a political issue. Well, I mean, it's kind of a political issue in Australia, but it's not on the same level at all. People are just arguing whether there should be interest on the loans or not. Whereas you guys, it's about, should we just in-debt students for the rest of their life?
So, priced out of university, it actually does not happen. I want to make that clear. It's not that it sometimes happens. It never happens. If you are smart enough to go to university and get a job after, you are fine. You will pay back your loan, no different than what y'all have. The problem in the United States was because so many students were told from high school to go to college. They were not prepared for college. They were not going to do well at college. And so they just went into college. And instead of getting legitimate degrees, like I think everybody here in this panel would have what you call a legitimate degree. 2 people going for an econ degree, 1 physicist, and a teacher, a math teacher at that, right? Obviously,
I've also got an econ degree, but just
okay. You've never talked to me about that. I don't know why we've never discussed that, Leo. Like, honestly,
scared.
never brought that up. I just thought you studied economics for debate. I was always like, what the fuck is he talking about this point right here? Like,
scroll okay. Up in our chats, yeah.
You've never said that in our chats, you lying fuck.
Okay.
So anyway, those are legitimate degrees. You can go out, like, if nothing else, we can go do analytics, right? So let's just say your physics degree doesn't matter. You just got an econ degree. He's got an econ degree. He's got a math degree for teaching. All of us can get out and go data analytics like that. You get out with a degree in gender studies in the United States, you have no job proposition. You're going to make minimum wage. Obviously, you're not going to be able to pay back the giant student loans that you have because you took a stupid course in gender studies. Y'all have to deal with that. Y'all have to deal with that externality at the government level. That person has to deal with that. And I would rather that person.
Yeah. They don't.
No, but I'm saying y'all have to deal with. No, what I'm saying
is, we don't.
Y'all have to deal with it at a governmental level, right?
Like
let's say all of Australia went and got gender studies degrees. The only person who loses out is the government, right? And the government is in.
Yeah, but Joe, you're missing the point. The reason those sorts of ludicrous course degrees don't exist in Australia is precisely because of the government intervention, which means that only the degrees which actually are worth something get funded in the first place. So you're pointing to another strength of the Australian system, whereas your university system, because it's so privatized, lets universities con students into getting loans to pay for bogus degrees which will never get them jobs. Whereas in Australia, the system protects people who are fresh out of high school by only offering them things which will actually help them.
The reason to believe that is true is, as I said before,
that problem you're talking about doesn't exist
at
in
the
Australia.
Undergraduate level, which means those things don't happen. As Chandler told you before, they are explicitly expansive, which means it is more likely to happen in America.
Well, you also have to look at.
We're not saying that the United States is perfect.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I'm just saying that you can jump in. We're not saying the United States is perfect. We're just saying that we're better than Australia.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that point of the degrees and how they don't offer those type of degrees. Well, first of all, there are a lot of degrees like an economics bachelor, right? You're not going to be able to do a whole lot of that. The job market for that, you're going to have to get a master's or a doctorate in most cases in that field of study. Similar with things like psychology for majority of the time. And clearly, these degrees in various fields in America equate to something because our economy is much more diverse than that of Australia. Once again, I'll point you to the majority of your economy. The majority of your economy is mining and agricultural based. Like if you actually look at what makes up your GDP.
You cannot just say, well, look, every time we point out something which is deeply flawed, you're like, well, something must be going right because we're bigger than you guys are. You could say that about anything. You could be, for example, we could say, oh, your murder rate's 4 times high. You're like, oh, well, clearly the murder rate's doing something, right? Because they must be killing all the dumb people because they're doing really well. You actually have to prove a logical thing. You can't just keep on coming back, falling back on the
I don't understand that.
Because it doesn't mean anything.
Argument for America ever. If you're stupid, we'll kill you.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Right. Okay. Well, look, if you think that's a positive argument, we'll let the.
I'll move to a different.
We may have education half to death. Do we want to move to another topic?
All right. In Australia.
Yeah,
if you go long-term or short-term unemployed, if you are in a car accident, if you have any medical issue whatsoever, the state will take care of you. It protects your children, it protects your family if you're a single-income household, and it makes sure people have a minimum standard of living. In America, the government says, get fucked.
Literally never happens.
Yeah,
no, that's such a ridiculous claim. The government says get fucked. We have one of the best welfare. We have one of the best welfare nets in the world. Obviously, we're not Scandinavia, but I'm not debating Scandinavians. I'm debating Australians.
Yeah, and Liam, which government organization is that quote from?
It's called the Republican Party.
They're not a government organization. They're a political party. Already won.
Yes, it was a joke. We have those in Australia. I'm not sure about America. Yeah.
That's true.
No, Australia is well known for its better use of sarcasm as well. It's
yeah, like the time they lost that word to emus.
Okay, I think
look it up. The Great Emu War of 1992.
What is this war of the emus?
I'll go through the whole story.
Had a war
brilliant.
Okay. No, my girlfriend's just
A
telling
horde
me
of
that there wasn't
flightless
even one
birds.
that
Like, I don't
even-
know what you want me to say. There were human casualties in a war versus flightless birds.
No, seriously though, have you seen how fast these emus are? Like, they have heads
Your
with these
arguments
huge
to
knobs on the
supporting
face.
how powerful
Pow,
emus
you know,
are compared to
it's
humans
real.
with machine
Okay,
guns. Like, this was after the First World War, man. Like,
But like this, if all of the
I'll
technology
definitely take
goes
that.
away,
Bullshit.
our animals will beat up
Bullshit.
your animals any day of the week. We've got kangaroos which can. Okay, hang on. Back to the medical the social security thing. I think what we're getting at is that both countries clearly have a welfare system. The question is that when things go wrong, like when you have a financial shock, for example, does the welfare system take care of you? And I think the clearest difference between Australia and America is healthcare, right? Like, and this is like, because in Australia, again, people aren't priced out of doing things like visiting the doctor, which is important because it means that people visit the doctor and start to take care of themselves before it gets to absolute breaking point. Like, I watch a lot of American news, and pretty much the carrying call from the Republican Party mostly is just, well, the ER is always free. You can always go to a hospital. But that kind of misses the point, because it means that the only point in which people feel like they are able to then seek treatment is the point where it's actually a crisis. Whereas in Australia, when you get your cough, that's when you go. And then it stops people's diseases from getting really, really bad. And that makes the system entirely more efficient. And I saw this really interesting stat today, actually. I was listening to this economist talk, and the US spends 17% of its GDP on healthcare, and most of the rest of the world only spends 7%. So we've more than halved the amount of money which actually goes towards healthcare, because we treat things earlier and we don't price people out of treating things preventatively. Whereas in America, people wait until the very last second because it's so expensive to gamble on treating yourself when the disease hasn't even developed yet.
When you say
So
that people go to the ER
the
crisis, I've been to the ER in America, and there's people there with like coughs and that don't even have tissues at home, and they just need to blow their nose. Like, they'll go there for anything, man, because it is free, and they'll go there like for any reason. So you're saying that they're just going to wait till crisis is not actually representative of the problem here.
Yeah.
Well, that's a problem though. If
But
you're
you think
like with people with runny noses,
like the
then
doctors
what about
in
the people with
Australia, there's
actual
people going there for a
emergencies?
variety of reasons. If it's free, it's the same problem on both sides. If you have a free universal healthcare system, you're gonna.
Well, no, because would you rather all the people with runny noses be spread out into all the GP clinics around the country, or would you rather them all be collected in the ER where, sitting next to people who actually need emergency care? Clearly, you'd rather them be spread out in doctors'
go ahead and
clinics.
make that point. I'm just going to say something about.
Yeah. So, but that's still, like, there's plenty of clinics around here that are still under that system. Like, for example, I got very ill a few years back, and I was able to go get the treatment that I needed for less than $100 because of because of how much the government actually paid for out of my treatment. And that's pretty representative of the entire American healthcare system. Now we're making strides to improve the healthcare system. I will completely concede that the American healthcare system is not perfect or even a functioning system currently, mainly because of the Affordable Health Care Act. But the strides that we're trying to take is, instead of offering free healthcare, create a competitive marketplace of healthcare providers that's going to ultimately benefit the American people and also give them options and service. If you look at someplace like Canada, for example, that has healthcare, they do have the overfluctuation of people in the hospitals, in the clinics, to where people can't get service, and there's years of waits for like doctors and specialists. And if you have a competitive marketplace where you can pick your service provider and get certain guarantees, and there's a incentive for healthcare providers to improve their service, that's overall going to benefit you more than the government just handing it out to you for free. Oh, I know Canadians. Yes,
do you actually
there was a
believe
man
that people
who
in
had
Canada
cancer
wait
that I
years to
personally
see a
know,
doctor?
and he had to wait 6 months before he saw a specialist for his skin cancer. 6 months on a waiting list.
Okay, so you've already then
Months to
dropped
years.
your year estimation by like 400%, because 6 months is half a year, before you said here's multiple.
It obviously
so
varies on your condition. I'm sure there's some people. I'm sure there's some people that have to wait years because that's how chaotic and unorganized their healthcare system has become because of that.
Cancer's pretty bad, you know. Like if 6 months is the wait time for cancer, I really don't expect the wait time to be much longer for anything else. Like, and this is why I find debating healthcare with Americans very frustrating. Because you guys have these aspirations and these dreams of a competitive marketplace where, you know, there's competition and people just, you know, the companies are really doing right by the consumers. It doesn't happen for a very simple reason. Companies are driven by profit. Because healthcare is one of those things where demand is functionally infinite, because people at the end of the day can't negotiate about their health, it actually makes more money to just to set the prices high, price out most of the consumers who can't pay and make your money out of the top than it is to serve everyone, which is why, and because people can't shop around when they're sick. There's not enough time. As you said, they go to the ER for a runny nose, right? So
yeah, look,
it's just a fundamentally poor system to deal with. Liam, do you have any thoughts on this healthcare thing?
In Australia is so long. The question I've got to ask is how long is it for America where everyone's going to the emergency ward and it's clogged up with people with runny noses, as you just said? I mean, there's a high demand for cancer assessments because with aging populations in both America and Australia, it means that more people are getting cancer and more people are getting older. Like, how do you square that? Importantly, the people who are getting fast wait times under your side are the people who can afford private healthcare.
Right, so I'm going to answer some of this because obviously what Ben said is mostly correct. But again, there are mechanisms in the U.S. system that does account for that. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the GDP ratio, right? 17% of our GDP is in healthcare, while the rest of the board is 7%. Obviously, the GDP in America for healthcare, there are other variables that are different. One is research and development. We are the world's leader in research and development. Pharmaceutical companies also fall under our healthcare, so they take up a significant portion, almost 2%. Not to mention that it also, if you're a university and you're getting a grant to work on some type of cancer research, which America is also the leader of that as well, then that money also goes into our healthcare GDP. So there is a reason why, not just because it costs more money. Obviously, it does cost more money, but I've explained that earlier to Ben that it costs more money because other countries, when they battle for resources versus America's hospitals are kept out of the fray to get the good price by big countries buying in bulk versus hospitals buying for a hospital.
Oh, so America isn't able to fend off the other big bad countries that are trying to price you guys out.
No,
you know what I mean? Like, you've just identified the problem that America has, and America's incapable of dealing with it. But Australia evidently has dealt with it.
Right. No, but
yeah.
Okay. No. So here's the thing. Here's the problem.
We are the problem.
Just because the system works for you, it causes inequalities for us. I think
No, Joe, the problem is you've got this backwards, mate. It's not the US government which suffers. It's the US, it's companies which suffer. Like Australia, for example, and New Zealand and other other Western nations bargain collectively on behalf of their citizens with companies in order to buy the drugs. The US does not. So, of course, we get a better price. But that's not the US government which is suffering, or the US people who are suffering as a result of that bargain. That's companies. So, I mean, I guess you could say, we really want, it would be great for the US if our pharmaceutical companies made more money. But they're doing okay. Right? I don't understand why the US government refuses. I do understand why the US government refuses to bargain with them. It's because they're stacked up with political donations, which is probably another topic. But just because your government is captured to political donations and special interests doesn't mean that it's better than ours or that we're the problem. That just means that you guys aren't willing to play hardball with special interests.
I want to point back to
that's a well-known feature of the American
trade, right? So when we made the World Trade Deal, because America made the World Trade Deal, one of the things we said is that if a country is going to collectively bargain for something, then it's going to cause a problem for the rest. Therefore, there should be no collective bargaining. Healthcare is the only trade in the world that is allowed to have a country to collectively bargain for it. That's not a good thing. I think all the other countries in the world should get rid of theirs and move to the American system. And I think America's system under that world would be better.
Right, but that's not the motion. The motion is current day. Tell me how America is better in this specific domain.
Recently.
That's true, yeah. But also, the American system is flawed because companies extort their people for money. I don't understand why it would be a better system for everyone to pay more for their healthcare and for companies to make more money out of it.
I'm telling you,
why
is
that a better system?
Cheaper if the rest of the world did it. The only reason why America's healthcare costs are so high is because we cannot collectively bargain, and because we put much more money into research and development. That way, we are the leader in medical research and medical technology. There is a reason.
No, Joe. Again, the American government does not put money into R&D. American companies do. Australia. It's not like we're completely blind to that fact either. So when we collectively bargain. Oh, sorry. Can you say that again? Oh, right. So the American government does not put money into R&D. American companies put money into R&D. But those are also protected under, for example, Australian collective bargaining. We have a patent system, and whilst they're on patent, they get paid a premium for, where they're brand exclusive and where they get to charge, whatever they want to the government. The government just cops it for a while, and then after that point, when there's generics on the market, then we just charge it whoever's paying the lowest cost. That is not a problem which is created by one company collectively bargaining. Like what you're suggesting is that if all the rest of the world stopped collectively bargaining, then everything would get cheaper. No, everything will just get more expensive, because when you collectively bargain, you're able to bargain for a cheaper price out of the company. Yes, the company loses money, but the USA doesn't lose money. Like American consumers don't lose money. That it's just the company. So if the US government updated its policy to so it wasn't so captured by a special interest, and pharmaceutical companies, by the way, I believe they're number one, or at least they're in the top 5 of lobbyists to doing political donations. It's pretty clear why they're not doing it. They're not doing it for people. They're doing it
but that says
for
nothing
political
to people
power.
like me and Chandler who completely disagree. I mean, I don't understand how the pharmaceutical company is here telling me that I should tell you what I learned in an economics textbook.
And just a quick point, Ben. Do you really think that the U.S. government spends no money on research and development?
Yeah. I'm sure they don't spend literally $0, but if you look at a lot of the major, for example, pharmaceutical developments and medicines, they're not funded by governments. They're not funded by governments. Basically, they're developed privately, right? Like private, and it's pretty clear why. Because when you go into R&D for medicine, it's pretty risky. Like most medicine research fails, so it's not really a thing governments tend to invest in. It's more private companies.
Well, most of the money that goes into R&D from the U.S. government isn't necessarily like the government setting up like a lab somewhere and doing testing in medical technology. It's going to be them issuing grants to various institutions, universities, and companies to fund their research excessively for the benefit of the collective people.
Okay, but how is that impacted by Australia doing collective bargaining?
I was just pointing out that they do actually spend money in R&D.
Right.
I'm sure that they give grants to universities, but the lion's share of money comes from the private sector. Because, again, you got to think of the politics of it. How politically savvy is it for you to say, as a politician, we're going to spend this money?
We lost him.
Well, yeah, we lost him. The emus got him.
I've actually got a suggestion. It seems that we're at an ideological difference on the healthcare. I think the facts kind of speak for themselves in favor of Australia. But regardless, obviously we both think that the other is wrong, which is fine. But I do think the facts speak for themselves. That said, when Hewitt returns, assuming he returns, so we've done education, we've done healthcare. Let's move over to crime rates, perhaps, and just general peace and stuff like that.
I would like to move on to global impact if that's a pretty big category, and I think that will actually a lot of time.
No, I think we should hold on to global impact to last because I think that's probably going to be the strongest point towards America. I think we can chalk up education, give it a little bit to Australia, give a little bit to healthcare to Australia. Crime, I think they're going to probably try to take it as theirs, but global impact, I think overall is going to land on America, even without being bigger.
Fair enough.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say?
So,
that? Yeah. Oh no. Well, you go, Chandler. What were you going to say? Actually, I'll just.
We're just going to save global impact till later. We can go to crime rate. But Liam, you are familiar at the time that Australia lost the war to emus, right?
Yeah. Look, I do know about it. But I don't often think about it. It's not something.
Oh, wow.
It's not something.
Block it.
Well, it's not something I've regularly considered. You know. I mean, for one, Western Australia is one of the least densely populated states within Australia. So the fact that many Australians know much about WA is actually surprising. Because think about how big Australia is. It's 4 hours from Sydney to Perth. Perth is the capital of Western Australia, which means that it's longer to get to another part of Australia than it is to get to Malaysia or New Zealand from Australia, which is just insane. I know America's big as well.
Yeah, you can drive for you can probably drive for a week coast to coast, east to west. I'd assume. Like it's crazy huge, but you don't see us losing wars to flightless birds.
Yeah, but yeah, you guys just lose wars to people in Vietnam with like trenches with poison spikes dug in it, and an army of less than a quarter of the size of the United States, and had nowhere near the technological superiority that you guys had. But go on, tell us all about it.
They were being First of all, they were being supported by Russia and China, so they clearly had good technology at the time, right? Because of the whole communist innovation. Second of all, I would rather lose to the Vietnamese than lose to flightless birds, okay? And third point being that one of the reasons we went into Vietnam was to protect Australia because of the communist domino theory, which was the theory that if all the countries around Vietnam fell, eventually it would impact Australia in a negative way. So you guys are welcome for that because we possibly prevented a catastrophe in your home nation.
That's
you'd be speaking Chinese right now.
That's actually a little bit untrue. I can't remember his name, but the way it went down from the Australian side is that America was in Vietnam and Australia, for lack of a better word, strong-armed the Vietnamese government to allow Australian advisors to come in, and then we took part in the war. So actually, Australia took an active part in it.
Yeah, we know. We got that.
Yeah,
but I do want to say that we did not lose Vietnam.
Oh, yeah, you did. Oh, yeah, you did. Boy.
Oh, really?
Chandler's like, Joe, stop making a fool of yourself, bud.
It's a draw. It's a draw. We did not lose the war in Vietnam. I think it's fairly considered a draw.
I wouldn't even consider it a draw. We lost 60,000 soldiers. We killed 1.2 million people. How the fuck do you lose 60,000 people to 1.2 million people? How does that make any sense?
Let me also put it this way. We killed more of them than Australia's current standing army. See, when you talk about Australia also going into Vietnam, they had your current standing army is 51,000 people compared to our 1.37 million active personnel.
And the question is, does Australia need this army? Absolutely not, because we've been able to engineer a diplomatic system in which we can defend ourselves without wasting trillions of dollars on our army. The United States spends more money on its armed forces than the rest of the world does combined. What does that tell you? It tells you that the United States is fucked up on diplomacy because it has to strong arm and control everyone, as opposed to using diplomacy and putting its limited funds into more important areas.
Nobody's going to invade Australia. You guys have emus. Nobody wants to get their ass kicked by emus like you guys. Nobody's going to invade Australia.
No, seriously. Let's have a serious conversation on this. You're out your damn mind if you think America spends more money on our armed forces than the rest of the world combined. That's not true.
No,
the United States. No, we don't. Let me explain to you why we don't.
It's like the next 25 or something.
Yeah, it's the next 25. It's still a lot.
No. Even then, let me explain this. Let me explain this way. The United States spends anywhere from 3 to 5% of our GDP on our armed forces. That is no more and no less than the average first world country, from anywhere from 2 to 4%. And if I'm not mistaken, Australia spends almost 6% of the GDP on the military. So just because we have a giant economy and we spend roughly the same amount as everybody else doesn't mean that we're spending more. It just means that we spend more because we're bigger, but it's still the same percentage.
No. Can I point something out? America has a population of around 330 million people-ish, whatever it is, it's around that mark. Do you think that the expense of the military must scale with population? Because because Australia recently hit a population of 24 million, we're rapidly increasing because of increased immigration and incentivized birth rates, because we had an aging population. But we have not scaled our military spending in response to that. So what I'm trying to point out here is that you guys are spending a disproportionate amount of funds on your military than you would otherwise need to do.
Y'all are doing roughly 6% increases in your defense spending up to 2021 and are projected to increase beyond that. That's why I got a call when I got out of the Army to come to Australia to join your forces, where I would, one, be given a rank higher and an increase in pay, because y'all are bolstering your Army faster than any other country on the face of the planet. So obviously that argument does make sense.
No. Hang on. I've got the answer. It's my phone overheated, by the way, so I'm on the laptop now. I think, Joe, the problem is that what Liam's pointing out is that measuring army increase as a proportion in this case doesn't make any sense, because your requirement for defense doesn't increase as your population increases. So, for example, like if Australia hypothetically needed to defend its borders, it doesn't matter how many people are inside the country. The border defense requirements are the same. They scale with, for example, the threat of outside, not necessarily how many people you need to protect. So the fact that Australia is bolstering its army as a proportion of our population doesn't actually matter, because it's not that's not really the relevant comparison. If you look at how much we are increasing our army just in real terms, it's nothing compared to the amount of money the US is spending on its army. Which is what Liam is suggesting. You've got a much bigger army than you need to defend yourselves, and that's
because we got to defend everybody else.
That's what I was getting at. So one, we have to take a sense of world proportion here, right? So for international free trade to happen, the United States Navy is the #1 defense for international trade. Now I go back to that World Trade Organization and the deals that they made. For that to happen, it is predicated on the United States Navy, which is the second biggest branch of the military, and in terms of money, second only to the Air Force, which does like a lot of stuff that Australia uses. But so a lot of the battleships and the stuff that we do is predicated on helping world trade. And secondly, we have to pay for Europe, because Europe refused to defend itself after World War II because they were damaged for so long. So now we're trying to cut spending and get other countries to spend for themselves. But Australia doesn't necessarily have to fall under that, because you're not as connected to Europe as the United States is.
Yeah, I get that. But the question is that what makes the superior country, the country who uses its allies and diplomatic means in order to engineer agreements which defend themselves? So the US, I get it, defends Australia's trade interests. That is true. We would just argue that being skilled at diplomacy, coming out the better end of the ANZUS Treaty, like the ANZUS Treaty, for example, is a complete ripoff for the US, right? It's like, you guys provide all of the guns and defense. We just get free defense. We think that makes us better because we've got the same amount of defense, but it's free. Whereas you guys have managed to have to pay for everyone else's defense. And I get it. You've got the bigger army, and I get it. Everyone needs the US in that sense. But you've been exploited by the entire world. Does that make you better? I mean, it's dumber, I suppose.
That's not what we're talking about, though. You asked me to defend the size. I'm defending the size. I'm not saying that makes us better. I'm saying that's a defense. No, we got away from the debate waiting on Ben.
Oh, right. Well, no, I'm back. So the debate's back. And the point we're making now is the fact that you guys managed to get yourself exploited into a whole lot of treaties where you pay all the money for all the defense and everyone else benefits. Shows that you're not that's not a thing which makes the country better.
Oh God. All right.
Okay, let's go more debatery. Let's talk about crime rates. So as I said before, there are 40.08 murders per million people, as opposed to about 10 of there are in Australia, which means you're 4 times more likely to be murdered in America than you are in Australia, which means people are more unhappy and are more likely to die awfully. Why is America better?
I don't know. Look at the rape statistic. You're 5%. You're 5% more likely to get raped in Australia than you are in the United States.
By about 5%, which is about like 14 in 1 million, right? That is a 5% difference versus a 4 times or 400% difference. Also, people who get raped don't die. Also, in Australia, we have a chronic over-reporting of rape. If you read any of the reports, they've been disavowed by almost every government organization because of the metrics that have been used being incorrect. You cannot over-report deaths because either you're dead or you're not by a murder.
You're right, but you can underreport murder in the case of the United Kingdom. I just want to point that out. The United Kingdom underreports murder. So does Australia have a giant gang problem?
There were some gangs in Queensland, but they've been mostly taken care of with what I would think are some very, very unlawful laws. But they're by no means in the same problem as they are in the United States.
Right. Okay.
The gangs in Australia are like are pathetic. They're small time.
I understand that. That's what I'm saying. So if you take out Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington D.C. out of the United States, we have a much lower crime rate.
So if you take out the worst places in the United States is better. Well,
three, though. Three.
No. If we're
talking about 3 cities.
Yeah, okay.
You know, if you take out all the uninhabitable land in Australia,
what kind of country allows all of their crimes to be concentrated in some really toxic cities? That to me speaks to a very poor government and a very poor country. You know what country doesn't have cities that are concentrated vile cesspits of murder? Australia.
Why though? You said that your country did something very unlawful and something that you should regret.
Oh, no. So
obviously, we're not willing to do that.
No. So the gangs in Australia, as Ben said, are minuscule. They do basically nothing. The laws that were implemented were just basically you couldn't wear the colours of the gang, which doesn't actually really stop the gang. It was just like a freedom of association thing, which is the unlawful bit, but it has virtually no impact on the gang. It was a politically palatable thing to do. The fact that these laws do absolutely nothing is irrelevant.
The lawyers actually pushed back. There was like the law in its original form was crazy because it was like you're not allowed to associate with a gang member if you know they're a gang member. And then like the Law Society came out and was like, this means that we as lawyers can't communicate with them as clients. And so the law got trimmed back to be actually something quite reasonable. But the real reason policy-wise, if you want to know policy-wise why Australia is doing much better than America, it's one, because we don't have as many private prisons, which are, incentivized to basically produce recidivism because it guarantees profits. And also because our police forces aren't as out of control and run by these crazy local sheriffs with all of, like army tech and stuff like that. That's just much more kind of, centralized organization.
Okay, so I'll bring up some points here. So, to start, you talked about like the murder cases, right? And yeah, you guys, especially our murder with firearms is higher than yours, but also, to my knowledge, firearms are illegal in Australia, right? That's correct.
Yes. That's another reason which we have less crime.
So, but if you look at almost every other kind of crime, auto thefts, assault, rape, you all have a significantly higher chance of having those crimes occur to you in Australia compared to America. Australia is number 1 in the world for assaults. They are number 2 in auto thefts compared to the United States being 6th in auto thefts. So if looking at murder is a very small margin compared to the overall crime rate in these various institutions of crime. You talk about like how the gangs are small and they don't actually do that whole much. Well, that's reflective of the population of the two different countries, right? So if we have, 10 times your population, I'd assume our gangs would be 10 times worse. That's not necessarily a point you can put into favor of Australia just because you're a smaller population and therefore have smaller organized crime.
Yeah, that's true. That I like the population point because, but what you've pointed out there is that all of your stuff about being bigger is also irrelevant because that's also just a function of population. With your other stuff about all the other things except for gun violence, except for murder, of course, as well, because you're 400% more likely to murder in the US. Question: define significant, because you said that the US was significantly lower in all of those other things. How significant?
So auto theft, for example, that's what I have pulled up. It's 12%. You're 12% more likely to have an auto theft occur to you in Australia compared to the United States.
Okay, what about something else? Because so far all of the stats you guys are bringing up, it's like 6%, 12%. Like kind of small differences. Arguably, most of that's contained within the margin of error. Whereas the only real significant one so far is murder, which I'd say is probably functionally much worse than all of those other crimes combined.
And it's 400%.
400. Like big difference.
No, okay. So I do want to make a point, right? So there's a culture problem in the United States that y'all do not have, and something that we have to take care of.
So a problem in the United States.
But we have done better than what you would have done in the same case because of the foundations of the United States. Slavery in the United States could account for just as much of the murder rate as anything else. We have to understand that there's been systemic and institutionalized problems in the United States that are going to have carryover effect into the crime rates. Taking that into account, and we normalized the ratios, I think we could say that they're roughly the same.
No, Joe, basically, have you never heard of the stolen generation, mate? Australia, it's not like Australia's past is clean either. We did kidnap a huge amount of the indigenous population's children and try and breed out our indigenous race. So you can't be like, America's got this uniquely racist past, which makes it difficult to do a crime. We are dealing with that as well. It's just that we've done a few things like, have national sorry days and, have closed the gap campaigns and stuff like that to shrink those things. So you can't be like, if Australia had to deal with those challenges, you'd do better, because we are dealing with our own challenges and we are doing better.
Right, but the scale of those, I think, are significantly different, right?
You hadn't even heard of it. How can you now claim the scale is different?
No, bro. The scale may be different because more people were enslaved in America, but also your population is bigger. So per unit capita, compare the Australian crime of the stolen generation versus slavery in America. They're about the same. Australia's doing better, dude.
I'm not even going to buy that the scale is different. You can't move from, well, I hadn't heard of this thing, to now I'm going to make an argument about how big it is on scale. You have no idea what the scale is like. So how can you go from not having heard of a phenomenon to making claims about its relative scale with another phenomenon?
Okay, because so let's say that we have the Native Americans in the United States. Let's say that exact same thing happened to the Native Americans in the United States. That scale would be equal. But then we're adding on the African Americans in the United States. Then we're adding on the Asians and the things that we've done to them.
Right, but you can't just say, let's just add on and say that they're equal. I mean, they're different, dude.
It's like the logic here is that every ethnic problem is one unit, and the more of them you have, just add them up. It's possible that one of them is bigger than all the other ones combined.
Why can't you add them all up? Because obviously there's been this is what I'm saying. There's a significant difference between the lost generation and then slavery, the destruction of the Native Americans, the internment of Japanese and other Asians in the United States, indentured servitude to Irish, the Irish and Italian wars in New York.
I mean, all right. So, Joe, I really don't think you're making much sense. But let's assume that everything you said is correct and the logic makes sense and it's persuasive. The motion is comparing Australia versus America in their current day forms. And even though you may have other problems that you may have dealt with differently, you did not successfully deal with them which is an evidence to believe that Australia is better. Because what you're doing now is just special pleading. If you guys had the upper hand in this debate, which I'm sure would be a new experience for you, you would be saying stuff, we would be saying stuff like, we had different problems as well. And then you would say, no, but this is the motion, okay? So what you're doing is special pleading because you guys are Americans and you want to win. Look at the facts of what is happening.
Well, we're just used to winning so much. It's rough to go without it. Especially when you don't lose to flightless birds.
It's already happened. You're already tired of winning.
All right, so yeah, exactly. But let's pull this out a bit because I think we've kind of hammered in the whole crime rate statistics to death. So I want to pull this out to global impact, right? So once again, like I brought up in my very first argument an hour ago, if Australia is such this great country that interacts with these countries and doesn't need to build up its military forces, then why does America have 3 times the amount of embassies that it does? 294 to just 52 of Australia in foreign countries. America has an embassy in every single country in the world that it recognizes within reason. And you also look at like the UN, right? The biggest IGO in the world. You look, and it's one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which ultimately gives it global power over all these other countries in the UN, to some example, with the veto power. So it's not logical to say that Australia still has that same global impact on the global stage that the United States does when they have significantly less power, both economically and in the IGO of the UN.
Okay, question. Is France our global world power?
Yes.
To some extent, yes, because they have a relatively strong economy, and they're also one of the P5 members.
Yeah, okay. Well, you guys aren't supposed to say yes. You're supposed to laugh because it's France. But, I mean, we'll leave that to the audience because, like, at the end of the day...
This is World War II. Like, I mean, they have...
The countries that are on the P5, you know why they're there, right? Like, they're there because in the aftermath of World War II, they were the victors on the Allied side. That doesn't mean that... that doesn't have any bearing on the current day. So, which is why you have,
Just a quick question. So are you going to say that the 5 countries on the P5 are not still relevant as superpowers in their country today? Because last time I checked, the USA, China, Russia, France, UK are all still significantly powerful countries in the global climate.
Okay, I'm saying that it's not a good measure of comparison. So say, for example, we were comparing Germany and France. Which one is the greater country in terms of world impact?
As of like today?
Yes, today.
France, by far.
Oh, come on. France is more impactful than Germany. You don't really believe that?
I would, yeah, I absolutely would believe that.
I mean, I don't know how to debate this anymore. If that's like,
no, there's a legitimate reason why.
Okay, for start, Germany's economy is way bigger. Like, okay, for example, when Angela Merkel speaks, right, that is a thing which plays into world politics, which other leaders listen to. Who was the last leader of France? Who's the current leader of France, actually? Do you guys know?
About to say Marine Le Pen, Macron.
No.
It's Macron.
Yeah, who was the leader before that?
Badass.
Who was the leader before that?
No idea. I really like it.
It doesn't fucking matter because France.
Quizzing our knowledge.
Stupid argument.
To their power in the global climate. Come on.
Just indicative. Like, Liam, surely you have some thoughts on this, right? It's just indicative that at the end of the day, like when it comes to who's a power in the euro, for example, right? Like who does Eurozone politics? The whole thing has been playing to Germany's tune for ages. It's almost set up just to serve Deutsche Bank, and like Deutsche Bank, for example, is much bigger than France's banks, and the whole thing's set up to to serve German export interests. France doesn't have as much of a say in that. I get that they're a big country, but the point is that if you look at Germany and France next to each other, one of them's on the P5, one of them's not on the P5. But that's not because of how powerful they are as countries today. That's just a historical thing in terms of who came out the victors in the aftermath of World War II. So those things are bad metrics. You're winning on the embassy stuff. I get that. You've got more embassies in Australia.
I think here are my thoughts on that. The first thing is that why is it the fact that you have more embassies a meaningful criteria even in a vacuum? Secondly, why is it, even if it is a meaningful criteria in a vacuum, overcoming any of the other criteria of which you've made basically no headway? And thirdly, as Hugh was just pointing out, you can value the impact that a country has on the world not just by embassies, which seems like a pretty arcane metric, but by the way in which it engages with the people. I would hark you back to a previous argument we made, which is to say that Australia has done significantly better in engaging on the world scale because it itself has been able to defend itself, create and cultivate good trade agreements without having to have an enormous army and take it by force. Importantly, if you guys think culture is like the biggest export of America, why is it they need to defend that export with at the point of a gun as opposed to any other good metric? Oh, and enforcing it on the rest of the world is which they've done previously.
Okay, so I'll just address two of these and I'll hand it over to Joe because I think he has something to say. So to start with embassies, when you're talking about how Australia is deeply tied in the interest of the rest of the world and they don't need an army, then it would stand to reason that they'd have such good relations that they'd have more than 52 embassies in the world. Okay, it would stand to reason that should serve some sort of significance for them to have embassies to relate to the rest of the world. You talk about Australia doesn't need a large army to defend itself. How many times has Australia been invaded by a foreign power in recent history with the intent, with the past 200 years, with the intent to completely take it over from a foreign power? Once. Okay, so historically speaking, you don't have a need for a great giant army in the same way that America gets involved in all these foreign conflicts, right? That's the reason. So that's the reason that your army is reflective of that.
So Australia is more strategically and militarily positioned to defend itself.
Hang on.
Isolationism.
How many times has America been invaded with the goal to take it over?
Oh, well, yeah, like 4 times. 4 times.
Spain,
mostly one of the British.
Spain, British, Canadians, Japanese.
The British again. Just to throw that out there.
No, that was the Canadians. The War of 1812 was the Canadian and British.
Oh, yeah.
Hang on. Are you guys talking about, like, you're not talking about wars against America as it is today. You're talking about, like, the early years of forming the United States.
Well, we're talking about, the War of 1812, the Spanish-American War, World War II, and I guess you could say the Revolution.
Okay. If you're counting World War II, then we get to count World War II as well. Surely.
Did y'all get? I don't know. Did y'all actually get attacked?
Yeah. How many attacks occurred on Australian soil during World War II?
Okay,
that doesn't mean that isn't God. Like attacking Pearl Harbor. Oh yeah, we had our own. What's it called? The Darwin thing. One of our cities was northern cities was bombed. But again, bombing a strategic position, a strategic military position, does not equal a goal to take over the country by a land invasion.
They bombed Pearl Harbor to try and make us lose hold of the Pacific. It wasn't just they wanted to cripple our fleet, obviously, but it was because they wanted to open up the gateway to launch an attack on the west coast of the United States.
I think we've probably had a lot more to do with also just invading like the rest of Asia on the coast.
They already had all the islands in the Pacific since after World War I. They got to keep all the islands they occupied from the Germans. The Japanese did.
Okay, but that means that from your guys' perspective, that because you've been invaded like 1 or 2 more times, because I'm not really going to count the ones which are in like the way early years of the US, because like it's fundamentally a different time that justifies having embassies in every country. Like the reason Australia doesn't have embassies everywhere is just because people don't embassies are mostly like, you don't need an embassy to have diplomacy with a country. Clearly, you can just call them or like I'm sure there are like government Skype channels and stuff. You don't need an embassy. Embassies are mostly there to protect citizens and tourists and stuff, or foreign nationals and things like that.
So then Australia doesn't have an outreaching national effect to warrant the implementation of these embassies around the world.
Well, no, we just don't have the requirement for it. So, for example, you're saying that the US has been invaded more, so it has a logical requirement for a bigger army. Well, we don't have as many foreign nationals, so we have a logically lower requirement for embassies. And that's not a comment. Like, how does any of this even matter for the average person in Australia or America? They're not wandering around thinking how powerful they are because of how many embassies they have in South Sudan, right? Like, it matters absolutely not. It's such an arcane way to measure a country's greatness or betterness.
Well, this specific point is on global impact, is the point we're arguing currently. The topic isn't, the citizens of Australia versus the United States. It is the country, and therefore global impact is a fair assessment of those countries. And if you think that just having people in a country is the only way to warrant an embassy in a specific area, that's just not accurate. If you think that we have a bunch of Americans in every single country in the world enough to warrant an embassy, that's just not statistically accurate. I'd assume there are countries out there, like Yemen or the UAE, where there's a very low population of Americans, yet we still have embassies there for diplomatic reasons and to protect our own interests in the given area, which means we have a greater interest in global outreach as the United States compared to Australia.
Yeah, but again, so there are two strategies for each of these criteria, right, that we can use. One, we try and fight you down to the margins, which is what we've been doing by suggesting that, using your own logic, that Australia doesn't need as many embassies. And secondly, we try and diminish the importance of the criteria. So I get that we're talking about global impact, but what we are saying is that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because it doesn't affect the majority of people in the country. Most people in America never take advantage or never see the fruit. If these embassies were to disappear overnight, it wouldn't affect your life at all. So we're just asking you, say, even if you've won this embassy race, which you clearly have, because we're not going to pretend that you've, got less embassies than us. You have more embassies than us, right? So the question then becomes, why does that even matter, right? So if these embassies were to disappear overnight, would your life change?
Absolutely.
Really? How?
Yes. So a lot of these embassies in their given parts of the world, especially ones in the Middle East, are there for American interests. And so we definitely see some economic repercussions from these embassies and American presidents and investor confidence in these given parts of the world disappear.
Can I ask a question?
Right, so you're saying, hang on, you go, Lev, yeah.
I was going to say, if you're walking down the street one night to your car after you've gone to university, and someone comes up behind you, stabs you in the back and slits your throat, are your last thoughts going to be of how fucking great is it that the US has over 200 embassies? No,
that one's a bit disingenuous.
No, okay, but okay, it's obviously I'm memeing, but it is serious. Compare the impact of the number of embassies that a country has. If Australia has less embassies, which we do, significantly less, and yet we are able to trade with basically anyone that we want, we're able to go basically anywhere that we want to in terms of travel and holidays, why do those embassies matter to the average individual? Also in context of all of the other massive harms that occur when you just live in the country of America.
Okay, well,
clearly.
Hang on, one other thing.
Ahead.
I actually don't think that your investor confidence point stands up either, because why, for example, can America not have a strong diplomatic relationship without an embassy? Are there lots of investors who for the embassy, it's the last straw? No amount of diplomatic channels, no amount of a free trade agreement, nothing will satisfy them unless there's a building on a plot of land somewhere, right? Who are these investors who are going to pull out because of this one thing? Yeah, you're laughing because it's silly, right? It's not going to happen.
Okay, I just want to add one thing here, and then I can give it a show. Just one thing real quick. Okay, so you say, well, clearly you're not having the same type of trade and diplomatic relations, because we have 6 times the amount of exports that you guys have. Per capita, we're still twice the amount of exports that you guys have. You guys have one of the largest net export trade imbalances in the world, comparing your exports to imports. And so clearly you're not on the same stage of trade and economics when abroad than the United States of America.
But who cares? Again, why does it matter that our export? Again, why does it matter?
Because that's promoting your domestic industries. What do you mean? If your products are not selling on the foreign market, that is a problem.
Well,
our products are selling. We're just not putting as many out as you guys are. I think you're making a mistake by saying, look, we're bigger, therefore we're better. That's not a way to win this argument, because by that argument, China would be the best country in the world, which I imagine you guys don't think it is. So seriously, look at both the per capita and the impact of those things which I don't think you're successfully doing.
Per capita and net exports are still in the favor of the U.S. We have 2 times the amount of net exports per capita than Australia.
Okay. I'm not disagreeing with that. The question, because obviously there's economies of scale and stuff. What's the impact of that?
if it is supporting your domestic economy. Like I don't that's such a like simple economic question. You want your goods to sell abroad. You want to have a trade balance in the favor of your country to accumulate wealth.
I don't agree with that.
It's
so let's
hang on. Accumulating
economic
wealth. For whom is the wealth accumulating? It's for the private companies which sell it, right? Which again, you could say that helps your economy if you had a sensible corporate tax rate and if there were sensible redistributive policies which actually then helped people. But you haven't got those, and that what you do have is going down the toilet very quickly with this most recent tax plan. So I agree that yes, you may have your biggest international exporters may be making more money, but at the point in which they're all stashing that money away in the Panama Islands and bundling them all up in tax havens, what does the accumulation of wealth amount to? Nothing. It's more money on Apple's balance sheet. Well, congratulations, Apple is more. Steve Jobs, is probably just cheering in his grave for how much money Apple's making. But for actual people, it means nothing much at all. So, have you got like a sovereign wealth fund for all this? Have you got a sensible tax rate? No, you haven't. So the money's not going to the people. And so the domestic economy isn't helping the people who live in it. It's just helping the people who are making money out of it.
We have the largest progressive tax system in the world, and then I'll pass it to Joe after that.
Okay. Woo! There's a lot to unpack there. Jesus Christ, guys. Y'all battled back and forth on some embassy shit that was just way too much. Fuck. Right. So, first and foremost, let's talk about trade agreements. North Atlantic Federal Trade Agreements, biggest trade agreement in the world. Bigger than the EU, firstly. Secondly, economic impact of the United States import-export. We go back to technological shifts throughout the world. Our technology exports shape the world around us. Next, our greatest export is our culture. We shape the world around us. These are all impacts that happen worldwide. How they affect the United States is, well, one, if we use our free trade agreements and our trade agreements to help our domestic companies, not just because you keep saying that, well, the tax rate isn't there to redistribute the wealth. That doesn't matter. The wealth redistribution, 70% of all companies' revenue goes to wages. If those revenues are bigger in the United States, the wages are going to be bigger in the United States. People in the United States make more money than Australia, not just because of size, but because of our exports, because of our industries, because of our manufacturing. That's the point that he's trying to get at. The next point I want to state, right? So the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist in Australia is Craig Jones. He recently lost to Gordon Ryan, the best in the United States. So obviously we should say that the United States athletes in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are better than that of Australia. Therefore, America is better. Because if we come down to it, America is Sparta, and at best, Australia is Athens. We will conquer you and piss on your dead graves, and that, at the end of the day, makes us better.
I would just send some emails over there on a boat.
What do you think the reciprocal relationship between Australia and America is?
Really big, actually. I think Australia, for the most part, really enjoys America, and America really enjoys Australia. I think y'all are probably the closest.
Right. So a threat of destroying us and pissing on us is pretty vacuous. The thing I would point out here is that Australia has a lot of options. You know who's the biggest option for Australia? China and the Asian region, because they want to trade with Australia a lot, because they want to win the economic war against America. Australia is one of the linchpins of US hegemony in the world. And you know what? If Australia wanted to, if we're going to dick swing about countries' power, Australia has significantly more political power in that regard, in that they could cripple America if they swapped a lot of their trade to China, because they could easily provide us with the protection that America can.
No, they couldn't. They do not have the overarching naval power that the United States does. We'd already conceded earlier that the United States is the reason why the world has free trade based on our naval. systems, and that y'all kind of parasitically live off of it. So sure,
Oh, okay.
go ahead and
Actually,
Parasite for life.
I was
Free, and you get all the benefits. That to me says better. Like I'm not going to claim like Liam that we could just switch to China just like that, but I do want to address some of the stuff Joe said. The stuff about like sports, I get it. You've got more sports people, right? So naturally you're going to have more winners. But Australia also does pretty impressively in the Olympics. Like swimming, for example, we do really damn well in, and that's and like I get the US also like has good swimmers as well. But Michael Phelps is just a freak, That guy's got like that. He's not really. That's not a function of how good America is. That's just a function of like that. Michael Phelps is absolutely ridiculous. Like we wouldn't say that like Jamaica's like #1 because they've got Usain Bolt, Like Usain Bolt just happened to be born there. Nothing about Jamaica which is making Usain Bolt. It's not like they've got this like revolutionary running training team, and only they will ever be able to produce the #1. Like when you're talking about sports people, you're basically talking about how many freaks of nature end up getting born into the country, which is just a wild coincidence, really. At the end of the day, I mean, there are some instances you could argue maybe team sports do averages and stuff like that. In which case, our cricket team is killer, and we are wrecking Britain in the Ashes right now. I get that Britain's not America. Do you guys play cricket? No.
No. No. We play real sports.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, speaking of real sports,
I hate to say
your
this.
football teams,
football
teams are really weird because they're like armored up and stuff because they're not willing to like really get into the sport as it's meant to be played. Whereas Australian rugby teams just smash against each other.
Right, what about this? What about something a little bit more impactful? When was the last time Australia had a lame duck prime minister and was unable to pass any meaningful policy that functionally calls a stopping of the government? When was the last time that happened in Australia? Because it's happened once in Australian history, and it was resolved within a couple of weeks. Right? This happens almost every other election cycle in America because you have a deadlock Congress and a deadlock House of Reps.
Yes, we set our system up specifically to do that.
Right, so you intentionally set up your system to stall and not implement policy that would meaningfully impact people's lives. That seems to me like a bad system.
Right, but you have to understand why the founding fathers did that. They didn't want a system that could easily pass laws. That way, a bunch of bad laws could get passed.
Right,
obviously, the checks and balance system worked, which is why most countries after the United States built it into them.
Okay, and now take that to its logical extension. We should limit the ability to have all laws because any of them could be bad. The thing I'm pointing out here is that habitually the United States goes into a period of time where they simply cannot pass any laws that would literally save people's lives, that would allow people to access education and health and like protect them from any other forms of crime. You guys don't get those done at all.
What I want to know is why are you guys such cowards? If the bad laws get passed, just correct them afterwards by repealing them and putting in better ones, learning from your mistakes, having a bit of faith in democracy. And I know why that happens. It's because of our earlier conversation about university, that everyone's priced out of getting an education so they don't know what's good for them and can't vote properly. But in Australia, when bad things happen, that laws are repealed the next election cycle. We frequently flip between parties. Like, the incumbent in America nearly always wins, not because they're popular, just because they've got crazy more access to financial resources. Money basically determines where elections go in America, whereas in Australia it's much different. It's more to do with just how good the people genuinely are as leaders.
Money does not make much difference in politics. I know I'm going to get lambasted for that, but look, Democrat Party makes 51% from this company, and then this company gives another 49% to the Republican Party. Those ideological divides have nothing to do with who's paying who. Ideological divides in the United States are a deep tradition from our forefathers, right? The Hamiltonians versus the Jeffersonians.
So what you're saying is that you have a deep cultural divide within your American culture that is embedded, that is arbitrary, foisted onto people who are born into families who are Jeffersonians or Hamiltonians, and as a function of that, your political system is better because it's as polarized as could possibly be, as opposed to in Australia, where there are political differences, but that doesn't mean that everyone actually hates each other, as you see in almost every election cycle and every viewing of Congress on American TV.
I have to disagree. I think the United States so far has been the greatest country with respect to political movement and political change. We can look at this. Like, I mean, seriously, we fought a Revolutionary War, and then since then we've had one internal struggle for the Civil War, which was specifically about slavery. And then since then, when Donald Trump took the power, people went outside and screamed. That's not hate. That's just a bunch of college kids acting kooky. That's like 30,000 people acting retarded. I'm sorry, I can't save 30,000 people from being retarded, but that doesn't mean that somehow we've had these major shifts in our country where we hate each other. Look, me and Chandler don't get along. Me and you don't ideologically agree on much, but you're still my friend. Ben's still my friend.
Yeah, that's because we're Australians.
Yeah. No, what I would say is compare the political rhetoric of the most recent, not even the most recent elections, say the previous election in America. Compare the vitriol that is used, or even internal, like just the Democratic primary and the Republican primary. Compare the vitriol that comes out of both the supporters and the politicians and the character assassinations that occur in American politics. Compare that to Australian politics, where yes, there's slamming ads and stuff like that, but they are by no means as damaging or as intense as what you guys have.
George Bush insinuated that John McCain had an illegitimate black child to win a primary. Like, that would never happen in Australia. You guys are...
But there's some hard felt foundation issues as to why it's going to happen. The major one being that in Australia, you're not guaranteed a right to freedom of speech. You're guaranteed a right to freedom of expression, but Australia does not have a Bill of Rights inherently protecting the rights of people to express themselves.
Australia has a right to political expression, and you can argue anything's political expression, which functionally means the same thing, just because we don't have the words that explicitly say.
And also, bills of rights are much worse at protecting rights than what we've got, which is the British common law system. Because the British common law system is just that you have all the rights, and then when they come into conflict, you sort it out in the courts. Whereas you guys have a Bill of Rights, which means that things not on the Bill of Rights are excluded by default. So the question is, would you rather the default be to have you have all the rights, or you have only the rights which are on the bill, where it's clearly better to have the default being that you have all of them?
I don't know what other rights you could have. What other rights?
Religious, like religious rights, right? Rights to having sexuality, all that, lots of tons of rights.
Legal, First Amendment.
The other thing about
those are all protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah, the other thing about the Bill of Rights is that anytime you want to add a right, it's often argued against because it's like, well, it wasn't on the original list, whereas the Australian system can morph and change as to what the society requires.
Okay, come on. You can't pretend that the American legal documents have never adapted over time. Like, do you think that they had? Do you think they had the foundation from like an Air Force back in
it's just shit fight whenever they do. Any other country which had Sandy Hook would have instantly changed its gun control laws. But like in America, it's bulldozed and put to a stop. Pretty much because of people are like, well, it's on the original list, or it's the Second Amendment or whatever. It's in the Constitution.
And do you want to know another country that had a comparable massacre to Sandy Hook and then changed its laws almost immediately? Australia, after the Port
That's not a good thing.
Yes, it's a great thing because now you haven't got arbitrary shit about a right to bear arms, which has nothing to do with holding guns, but is about protecting yourself and creating a militia against a malevolent government. Nothing to do with just owning a gun, which means the rights that are initially substantiated in the Bill of Rights get corrupted because of vested political interests. This does not happen under the system that Australia has.
Okay, but you can agree that having a specific judge rule over a concept rather than an inherent right promised in a founding legal document can be problematic. So, for example, something like you brought up earlier, like the corrupted police officials and the kooky sheriffs that used to work in the army. I still have inherent rights to protect me with something like the Fourth Amendment that's deal with search and seizure. You are not guaranteed those same rights inherently in Australia, which can lead to more civil disputes between like the law enforcement, the government, and the citizens.
No, we have laws about warrants as well. Of course we do.
But those can see the difference between a specific law and an amendment is in like a right is a very finite thing in like the legal proceedings, right? Because it happens with like how if it works out in a courtroom or if it works out there. So like if I am in my car and an officer wants to search it and I decline the search if he doesn't have reasonable suspicion, he will not search my car because of my Fourth Amendment right. And if he does, he'll lose his job. If you go to a courtroom and they search that in Australia, and you go to a courtroom and they can, come up with some reasonable suspicion, BS that they come up with pretty often the time, you are not going to be protected the same way that you're going to be protected by an amendment of a Bill of Rights.
Okay, Bud. If Australian police are not able to enter private property unless they have probable cause, but the claim that you just made is that your amendment protects you when you go to court, whereas in Australia, they make up some bullshit probable cause. I would posit to you that exactly the same in the American system. A police officer can come up with bullshit probable cause because it's your word against them. What is your argument?
Well, it goes out to other laws too, like the First Amendment, for example. I did some like simple research before this round, and you can find times where there's been contradicting court cases in Australia on the topic of free speech, right? Where different things are interpreted as call to actions, different things are interpreted as hate speech or free speech or what have you, and you're not going to see that same divide under a system where you're constitutionally guaranteed the right to free speach.
No, of course you are. Of course you are, because. Yeah, because the point is that both of the things are argued in court, and the question is the thing speech or not? So you can have bogus interpretations under both systems. Like under your system, corporations can give money, and that's called speech, right? Like the courts can gerrymander what is defined speech as much under either system. That's not a comment on like I don't understand what the difference is.
The other thing too is that. Even so, our laws are more flexible. So even though there's misinterpretation on both sides, as Ben pointed out, ours are significantly more flexible, which means that when wrong decisions are made, they can be unmade, right? And another example of that flexibility is exactly what I was saying before about the right to bear arms. Absolutely, is that a bad right because it gets corrupted and polluted by political interests? I know Chandler agrees with me. I don't think Joe does, but it doesn't matter what you think, right? What I'm saying is that the idea of gun ownership in America has become significantly less about the right, and it's like about the right, not the right wing, and it's just become like I think that everyone on the right, or all Republicans are like just swing their dicks around for, and it becomes less about the issue and more about the principle of just saying, look, we were correct. And that is a really toxic culture for politics to exist in. It should exist in one that's malleable and can change over time to what the society requires. Because, as Joe pointed out earlier, America's been around for a longer amount of time. They've dealt through lots of different things. The population in the Civil War is significantly different as it was under Jim Crow and as it is now. So you need a legal system and a political system that reflects that, rather being like stayed in some archaic document that was written down by people who've been dead for hundreds of years.
I've got to tap out because I've just realized what the time is. We've been going for some amount of time, and I've got to go back to my beach holiday. So Australia has better beaches as well. But yeah, anyway, look, it's been a pleasure. I'll see how long Liam wants to 2v1 you guys. But in any case, I'll catch everyone later.
All right, stay safe with emails.
Will do. Bye.
But to that point, Liam, I'd say that it's not fair to say that the United States Constitution doesn't change. Things like women's suffrage, the right for slaves to vote. These are things several times have there been amendments to the Constitution. Prohibition, getting rid of prohibition. It happens like fairly regularly, to be fair to our country's history. Okay. Saying that it's a static piece of documentation that's only been written by people a few hundred years ago, it's not actually realistic.
Mate. I really, and I think there's like 4 or 5 people watching right now. So I want everyone to think about this for just a second. I'm not arguing that it doesn't change. I'm arguing that it's harder to change, that people become entrenched in their views because the Republicans in America are so principled with their documents and their constitutions, which means it's harder to, which means they push back against good ideas, not because they think they're bad ideas, but because they're ideas that they didn't think their document could come up with. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it happens less, or it's harder to happen. And that's bad when you have a changing society that ought be reflected by its system. And I want to say hi to, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Chuzik, who just hopped on.
Hello. Hey, man.
Okay, so I'll pass this to Joe because I can tell that he has some built-up aggression towards this right to bear arms topic.
I hope you can see it in my eyes.
Hit me, daddy.
Don't you call me that. I'll thank you all night.
He's a house husband.
I am. Fuck my life. All right. So let's start off with, first of all, I completely disagree with you that guns are a net negative. I think you're out your damn mind. For every gun crime that there is in the United States, there's an inverse gun stoppage of crime. So consequentially, that nets out to 0.
Okay. Question. Sorry. So just to interrogate that logic, from your perspective, this is my left hand, and this right hand. So number of gun crimes, number of gun protections, and you're saying they're even out, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question I have is, how many in this barrier here of gun crimes are caused by the existence of more crimes? Caused by the existence of more guns. I would posit that more guns makes it easier to commit robberies, for example. So even though guns do protect some other crimes, the guns themselves are the cause of other crimes, which means that if you remove them, they'd probably still equal out, but the intensity and the what's the word I'm looking for? The severity of the crime is significantly less because people don't die. When you go with a baton, you're less likely to kill someone.
All right.
Well, like you brought up earlier, you brought up the Sandy Hook shooting. Criminals inherently target some place that does not have guns when they're going to do these mass shootings. I think that's completely fair, and you can see that in statistical evidence. They target, airports. They target schools. They expect you, and they count on you not having a gun.
Yeah, and gun crimes virtually don't happen in Australia. Like there are not mass shootings in Australia. Like they happen exceptionally rarely. Like the most recent one was in 2014, and then before that it was like something like a decade. Like it doesn't happen, dude.
No, we get that. Again, I understand all of that, but first of all, let's talk about size. Like 60% of gun deaths in the United States are suicide. And then we have a population of 364 million people. There's like 2,237 people die from gun crime, from guns in the United States. And then when we disaggregate that and take out pistols, like long rifles and stuff like that, more people are killed by bats than there are AR-15s. More people are killed by hammers than there are shotguns. So obviously these crimes are still happening. And secondly, the cause of crimes is not guns. Guns allow a crime to happen, but it does not cause a crime to happen. If I wanted to rob a bank and I don't have a weapon, I'm going to find another way. It doesn't mean that that the crime does not happen. It just means that it's not going to use guns. So I find that really odd.
Yeah, so let me respond to that. So the argument that you just made is that guns don't cause something to happen, they allow it to happen, such that if you wanted to commit a crime, you'd find another way. What I'm going to say is yes, they would find another way to do it. The difference is they don't have the force multiplier of a gun. You are like, if you try and rob a place with a baton, you're less likely to kill someone than if you are with a gun, because a gun is more intimidating. It's easier to shoot someone. It's easy to lose your thought in the moment. Like if you go to bash someone with a baton, it's easier for people to come and attack you because you don't have the range of the gun and you don't have the immediate just like stunning ability for shooting someone in the leg or the immediate death of someone by killing them, which means that yes, crimes will still happen. They occur less as they do in Australia, as we pointed out before. But even if they occur equally the same, they're less severe, which is a reason to believe that it's bad. And So, and obviously, just for everyone who's watching, if anyone's tuned in, the logic that we got to was that there are bills of rights, and those are bad because they're less flexible, and it means people get entrenched in their beliefs and don't change even when there's good arguments proposed. And now we're talking about guns, which is one of those entrenched beliefs.
Right. Well, the reason why I'm doing this is because as of right now, Ben's gone and we're kind of moving on, and I actually wanted to have this discussion in general, not because right. I don't think that. Yeah, but you kind of like did it as like, oh, we'll look at this. They're obviously fucked up on logic. I'm just moving on to another topic.
No, I'm not talking about logic. I was just saying, for anyone who's confused as to why we're here. I mean, right now we're just talking about various differences between Australia and America. It's not so much a debate anymore. The debatey stuff was right at the start.
Right, and that was pretty fun. But so let's talk about this. The intimidation factor, right? I think you nailed it on the head. Why gun violence in the United States is not as significant as it should be, because it is more intimidating, right? So I'm going to point to a guy named Pat Miletich. He's a MMA instructor, really famous, but he also did a little bit of stuff with the Army. And there's also a guy named Greg Nelson, who is one of the creators of what in the United States we call MACP, Modern Army Combatives Program. SOCP, Special Operations Combatives Program. And I'm giving you this as a broad idea of like my ethos statement here. And I worked a lot in self-defense. Obviously, Liam knows this, not just catch wrestling, but in self-defense.